Elena was radiant. In the chandelier-lit hall, the opulent audience held its breath as she stepped onto the stage. The awards ceremony marked the pinnacle of a seemingly flawless journey, a reflection of her strength and determination. Dressed in an elegant navy blue silk gown, she exuded confidence. Each round of applause echoed like a reminder that she had conquered every challenge life had thrown her way. But fate is an unpredictable master, and that night it was about to reveal its hand. The letter arrived silently, like a ghost cutting through the grandeur of the moment. The pale envelope was delivered by a waiter, who hesitated slightly before extending it toward her. Elena, her impeccable smile still in place, took the paper with a discreet gesture. The message it contained was like a storm gathering on the horizon, something no one in the hall could have imagined, yet something she could feel eating away at her sense of calm. In that instant, the brilliance in her eyes shifted, transforming into a mixture of disbelief and tension. As camera flashes captured her flawless image, Elena maintained her serene expression. It was a skill she had perfected over the years, concealing inner chaos with the precision of an artist. Yet inside, the words in that letter pulsed like a scream. The message contained a name, a place, and a promise of revelations that could shatter everything she had built. The past, ever treacherous, had emerged from the shadows like an unpaid debt. Still, Elena didn't let the unease show. With a measured sigh, she carried on with the evening as if nothing had happened, accepting the award and delivering carefully chosen words of gratitude. Her thoughts, however, had already drifted far from the glittering scene. The admiring crowd had no idea that as she smiled for the cameras, every step she took off the stage brought her closer to an abyss she wasn't sure she could avoid. The glory, subtly interrupted, became a harbinger of deeper battles yet to come. As soon as the ceremony ended, Elena found refuge in the luxurious dressing room, away from the spotlight and the adoring crowd. Her steady hands held the envelope with a mix of reluctance and urgency. The opulent world she had built seemed, for the first time in years, vulnerable. As her fingers slid to open the paper, she felt the weight of old memories and pains she had never expected to revisit. The message was short, but as sharp as a blade. I know what you did. The past never dies. The absence of a signature didn't surprise her. She knew exactly where it had come from. Her mind worked frantically, as if each phrase she read was a piece of a macabre puzzle. Elena recalled faces, places, and broken promises, trying to fit the sender into the story that had resurfaced to haunt her. The millionaire status she flaunted now seemed insignificant in the face of the weight of that threat. Yet, to any onlooker, her reaction was as composed as a still lake on a windless morning. Only the press of her lips betrayed the storm brewing in her mind. Even amidst the internal turmoil, Elena knew she had to maintain her composure. Her ability to conceal emotions was almost like armor. But in that moment, even she felt fragile. Sitting on the white leather sofa, she took a deep breath, struggling to bring order to her thoughts. Call someone? No. Trusting others had never been Elena's way. This was a burden she would bear alone. But behind her calculating eyes, there was a spark of something deeper. Fear. A fear she hadn't felt since her youth. When she left the dressing room, she had already decided that no one would ever know about the letter. The smile returned to her face like a carefully adjusted mask as she greeted guests and answered reporters' questions. But her mind was elsewhere. Every word she spoke seemed automatic, as though someone else had taken control of her actions. To those watching, Elena remained the image of a wealthy and unbeatable woman. Yet only she knew that, inside, a battle was raging between fear and determination. When the night finally ended and the last champagne glass was raised, Elena withdrew to the silence of her penthouse. The horizon of illuminated skyscrapers stretched endlessly, but her eyes were fixed on the letter, now lying open on the glass table. The luxurious surroundings, carefully curated artwork, and bespoke furniture seemed to lose their luster in the face of the moment's urgency. She knew there was no time for hesitation. The past was knocking at her door, and ignoring it was not an option. With a decisive motion, Elena grabbed her phone and began scrolling through old contacts. They weren't friends, but names of people who owed her loyalty, favors she had accumulated over the years. She knew she needed information, answers, and a plan. The instinct for survival that had propelled her to the top kicked in, like a wild animal sensing danger. Every decision had to be calculated, every move flawless. But the silence of the night brought more than the sound of her fingers tapping on the phone screen. It brought doubts. What if she was wrong? What if it was a bluff? A trap? For a moment, Elena hesitated, her gaze drifting over the city she had once sworn to conquer. Yet fear quickly gave way to resolve. This was a matter of survival, not just of her reputation, but of the identity she had meticulously crafted. It was her life or the past. By dawn, Elena had made up her mind. She was not the kind of woman who waited for things to happen. She wasn't one to let others control the game. Whoever was behind that letter, she would find them first. Before they had the chance to destroy what she had built, she would uncover the mystery and neutralize the threat. With one last sip of coffee, she stepped out the door, her gaze steely, ready to face whatever came next. Alone in her luxurious penthouse, Elena stared at the envelope resting on the table. The city sparkled below her window, but her mind was consumed by the letter's contents. There was no time to hesitate. She knew the empire she had built was under threat. Her hands, now steady, picked up her phone. It was time to act, to seek answers, and to protect what was hers. Every move would need to be calculated, every decision flawless. Elena took a deep breath, allowing her resolve to take control. She wasn't a woman who backed down in the face of the unknown. The past might be treacherous, but she would confront every shadow. Before dawn, she had already crafted a plan. Whoever was behind this threat wouldn't stand a chance. When she stepped out of her home that morning, her gaze was one of pure conviction. Elena's world would be defended at any cost. Years before she became the respected figure who now dominated the business world, Elena was just a determined young woman in a hostile environment. Her life had begun in a modest neighborhood, where dreams were often crushed by harsh realities. She was a girl who believed in the impossible, but the world around her seemed to delight in proving her wrong. It was in this setting that she met him, a man of smooth words, tempting promises, and an undeniable magnetism. Their romance was like fire, intense but dangerous. He was a wealthy criminal with a talent for charm and manipulation, offering Elena a life she had never imagined. At first, she ignored the warning signs. The dazzling world he presented blinded her to reason. Lavish dinners, spontaneous trips, and an overwhelming passion made her believe it might be true love. But not all that glitters is gold, and soon the darkness began to reveal itself. He controlled everything, from what she wore to who could be part of her life. What seemed like protection was, in reality, captivity. Elena realized her life had become entangled in a dangerous game, where every move she made was closely monitored. She began questioning his intentions, only to uncover disturbing truths. He was more than just a mysterious millionaire. He was a man surrounded by enemies circling him like vultures. And to her horror, she was merely a pawn in his game. The night everything changed began with an unexpected invitation. He insisted she accompany him to a strictly professional meeting. They arrived at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a cold, shadowy place filled with eerie silence. Elena noticed the tension in his movements, but didn't dare ask questions. Unknown men arrived, carrying briefcases and folders, while the air grew thick with palpable unease. She overheard mentions of vast sums of money, contracts, and, most chilling of all, veiled threats. Everything seemed under control until voices were raised, and the deal fell apart. Shouts turned to insults, and then gunshots. Elena froze. He shoved her to the ground, ordering her to stay quiet as chaos erupted around them. Men scattered in every direction, and she heard the word police echo like thunder. Sirens began wailing in the distance, but what terrified her most was the coldness with which he abandoned her. He fled through a side exit without even glancing back, leaving her alone in the midst of danger. Disoriented, Elena tried to escape on her own, but was intercepted by the arriving police. They cuffed her without hesitation, treating her as a suspect. She found herself at the center of a storm, interrogated for hours under suspicion of involvement in illegal activities. Her heart pounded, but she knew any misstep could seal her fate. With a mixture of forced calm and sharp wit, she denied any involvement, claiming to be nothing more than a deceived girlfriend. That's how Elena ended up behind bars, accused of crimes she hadn't committed. The police didn't want to hear her story. Her connection to him was enough to make her a suspect. She spent weeks in a cold cell, surrounded by disdainful stares and silent judgments. Each day was a battle against despair and the sting of betrayal. Though innocent, she faced a system determined to crush her. Yet her mind, sharpened by the will to survive, refused to give in, thanks to a lack of evidence and the efforts of a public defender who believed her story. Elena walked out of prison a changed woman. She was no longer the naive girl who trusted blindly. His cruel abandonment and the injustice she had endured had forged a new version of herself, hardened and resolute. Elena's escape began the moment the prison doors closed behind her. With a release document in hand and nothing but the weight of her past to carry, she knew vanishing was her only option. The city felt hostile, every face in the crowd a potential enemy. Her worn-out shoes and nearly empty suitcase were all she had left. The unyielding survival instinct that had always driven her propelled her forward. She had no plan, but she had a purpose: to start over. At first it was all about running. She picked a random spot on the map, a place far enough away to ensure no one would recognize her. Using the little savings she had scraped together before prison, she boarded a night bus, leaving the chaotic metropolis for a small, anonymous town. There, amidst quiet streets and unfamiliar faces, she began to rebuild, not just her life, but also her identity. The first thing she did was erase any trace of who she had been. She changed her name, cut her hair, and bought clothes that wouldn't draw attention. Every move was calculated, every step strategic. Elena knew the world wouldn't give her a second chance. She learned to observe and to listen, skills that would soon become her greatest assets. Her days were long, filled with menial jobs that paid just enough to get by. At night, she mapped out her future in silence, dreaming of something bigger. It was in a small cafe that her life began to shift. Working as a waitress, Elena noticed details others overlooked. Regular customers, conversations laden with hidden intentions, patterns that revealed more than words ever could. Her mind, sharpened by her time in prison and the world she'd left behind, began to see possibilities. When a frequent patron mentioned struggles with his small business, Elena recognized an opportunity. With a mix of boldness and charm, she offered him advice. Impressed by her insight, he suggested she work for him as an assistant. It was a modest start, but the beginning of something significant. Elena threw herself into the role, absorbing everything she could about the business world. She studied power dynamics, observed how decisions were made, and soaked up each lesson as though her life depended on it. In many ways it did. Elena didn't stop there. She used every small victory as a stepping stone to something greater. The savings she managed to set aside were reinvested into small ventures that promised modest but consistent returns. As her funds grew, so did her confidence. She quickly realized that success wasn't just about hard work. It was about anticipating the next move. This ability set her apart and allowed her to thrive at a pace that even she found remarkable. Over the years, Elena became an unstoppable force. She climbed the ladder step by step, turning challenges into opportunities. When she finally secured her first major contract, she felt, for the first time, in control of her own destiny. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a strategist, someone who shaped the world to her advantage. The empire she began to build was more than just wealth. It was a testament to her resolve. But success came with a price. Elena understood that protecting what she had built required even greater strength. To those around her, she was a sharp, calculating leader. But few knew the depths of the scars she bore. Prison abandonment, the fight for survival, all of it had shaped her into someone she barely recognized. The past was buried, but it was still a part of her. Even so, Elena didn't look back. Every triumph, every signed contract, was a reminder that she had won. Yet now, with the letter in her hands, the past she had worked so hard to escape seemed ready to resurface. She knew the ghosts she was about to face weren't just remnants of another time. They had a face, a name, and a story that refused to stay buried. Elena was never one to wait for answers to fall from the sky. The moment she reread the letter, seated in her office, with its sweeping view of the city skyline, she knew she had to act immediately. The first rule was clear. No one could know what was happening. The empire she had built depended on her image of absolute control. A single misstep, no matter how small, could be fatal. Every move she made would have to be in the shadows, with the precision of a surgeon. Her first step was to trace the sender of the letter. She read the text over and over, searching for tone, subtle details that might reveal something about the author. The words were blunt, almost cold, as though written by someone who knew her deeply. Yet the lack of a signature suggested meticulous care to remain anonymous. That only reinforced one thing: whoever it was knew enough to cause real damage. Elena decided she needed help, but she couldn't rely on her usual contacts. Hiring a run-of-the-mill private investigator was too risky. One mistake could expose everything. Instead, she chose someone off the radar, a fixer from the underground, someone specialized in handling situations where discretion was paramount. He didn't ask questions, and that was exactly what Elena needed. Hours passed before he called back, promising preliminary leads in a matter of days. While she waited, Elena turned her attention to her own arsenal of resources. Always the strategist, she knew information was the greatest weapon. With unrestricted access to cutting-edge technology and an impressive network, she began investigating on her own. Names from her past resurfaced in her mind like ghosts. Each one represented a potential threat, someone with a motive to see her fall. When the first bit of intel arrived, the puzzle pieces started coming together. The investigator traced the letter to a small post office in a town hundreds of miles away. A discreet location, typical of someone who didn't want to be found. But what caught Elena's attention was a nearby security camera that had captured a man wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses mailing the envelope. It was a small detail but a critical one. Elena studied the image until she felt she knew the man. His build, the way he carried himself, everything hinted at someone who had crossed her path before. His face wasn't visible, but the déjà vu was undeniable. The discovery brought a surge of unease. Could it be him? The thought seemed absurd, yet it made perfect sense. Was he alive? And if so, why had he waited so long to resurface? The following days were filled with clandestine meetings and coded messages. Elena knew she couldn't let her guard down. Her mind was torn between maintaining control over her high-profile routine and digging deeper into the threat looming over her. Meanwhile, new pieces began to fall into place. The investigator unearthed records of unusual financial movements tied to accounts she recognized from his past. More clues emerged, but each one raised more questions than it answered. Elena confirmed that not only was he alive, but he had maintained a low profile, operating on the fringes of the system. This complicated matters. It meant he had resources and very likely allies. Confronting him directly would be a mistake. She needed a solid plan before making a move. As the investigation progressed, memories from her past invaded her mind with growing frequency. The weight of his betrayal, the fear of prison, and now the uncertainty of his true intentions sent her heart racing. She knew she couldn't afford to lose focus, but the emotional tension was undeniable. Elena felt as if she were walking through a minefield where any misstep could prove fatal. Still, she didn't retreat. On the contrary, each new clue pushed her to dig deeper, to connect the missing pieces. The letter was only the beginning, and now the game was coming into focus. But Elena was no longer the naive young woman who believed in empty promises. She was a woman who had learned to face the world with the strength of someone who had already survived the worst. Whoever was behind this threat would soon find that out. At the end of a long day, a final lead emerged, a list of names tied to his recent financial movements. As she scanned the list, one name made her stop cold. It was someone she never expected to see again, someone who had played a pivotal role in the past she had tried so hard to bury. This wasn't just a threat anymore. It was personal. Elena arrived home that evening, tossing her bag onto the couch and spreading the documents across the table. With each photo and every report, an unsettling feeling tightened its grip on her. He was alive, there was no doubt about that, and the connections emerging were deeper than she had anticipated. There was no room for hesitation. Picking up her phone, she called the investigator. "I want every detail on him and anyone tied to these activities. Send it to me by tomorrow morning." The following hours were a blur of swift actions. Elena reorganized her financial records and reviewed old contacts, searching for any trace of vulnerability. This wasn't paranoia, it was survival instinct. He hadn't just resurfaced, he had done so with surgical precision. When the investigator's first message arrived, her eyes locked on the screen. The information was clear. He was in the city, staying under a false name at a luxury hotel. It was the confirmation she needed. The next day appeared routine, but Elena felt the weight of a minefield beneath her every step. She signed documents and attended meetings, but her mind was elsewhere. Between appointments, she read updates from the investigator. One detail caught her attention, a meeting scheduled at a restaurant that evening. It was a rare opportunity to see who he was meeting and why. Without hesitation, she decided she would be there. That night, Elena dressed impeccably as always, but there was something different in her eyes. Determination. She entered the restaurant discreetly, choosing a strategic table with a view of the entrance. Every minute felt like an eternity until he finally arrived. Older, with streaks of gray in his hair, but unmistakable. Watching him shake hands with another man, a face she recognized, made her stomach churn. That person wasn't supposed to be there. Elena discreetly snapped photos of the meeting on her phone, acting calmly despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Confronting them now was too risky. Instead, she observed them, taking in every gesture, every word she could lip read. When they stood to leave, she followed them at a distance, trailing them to a nearby alley. The group climbed into a black car, but before the vehicle pulled away, one of the men turned and looked directly at her. Back at her apartment, Elena tried to organize the information, but her mind was racing. There were too many unanswered questions. Why had he resurfaced? Who were these people with him? It was clear this wasn't a coincidence. The past was moving against her, but she knew she needed more evidence before making her move. Her strategy was simple: uncover the full network before taking it down. The following days were a whirlwind of frenetic activity. Every break in her work schedule was spent analyzing documents and cross-referencing data. More names began to surface, and Elena realized she wasn't dealing with just him. This was a web of dangerous alliances. Among the names, one stood out, a person she never would have imagined to be involved. The revelation added a new layer of uncertainty. Elena decided to ramp up surveillance. She discreetly hired additional professionals to investigate the new names. They sent her photos, videos, and reports that helped connect the dots. But as the answers began to crystallize, new threats emerged. An anonymous message arrived on her phone, warning her to stay in her place. The intimidation made her smirk a cold, calculating smile. If they wanted to scare her, they'd have to try harder. Her next step was preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Elena knew it was only a matter of time before they made a direct move against her. She reinforced her security, ensured her empire was fortified, and meticulously reviewed key contracts. The powerful world she had built wouldn't crumble easily. Yet deep down, she felt the clock ticking. Something big was coming, and she had to be ready. That night, alone in her office, Elena gazed out at the illuminated cityscape. She knew this battle wouldn't be won through brute strength alone. It required strategy. The past had taught her never to underestimate an enemy. And now, with nearly all the pieces on the board exposed, she could feel the confrontation drawing closer. Whoever was behind this would soon learn that crossing Elena was a mistake that would come at an extraordinary cost. The clock struck 11 at night when Elena received the message that changed everything. It was a photo of a meeting in an underground parking garage. At the center of the image stood him. There were no more doubts or assumptions. The man Elena had thought vanished forever was there, more alive than ever. That face she had sworn to bury in memory now stared back at her in stark reality. But what unsettled her the most was the person standing beside him, a familiar figure, someone Elena knew all too well. Her heart raced, but she wasted no time. Grabbing her phone, she called the investigator, demanding immediate details about the location in the photo. The address came quickly, and Elena decided to go there alone. It wasn't wise, but the urgency overpowered her caution. She dressed carefully, choosing something understated, and drove to the parking garage, a dark, nearly deserted place. Every step she took felt heavier, as though some part of her knew the truth would be hard to face. Upon arriving, she stayed hidden in the shadows, watching. It wasn't long before the sound of footsteps echoed through the space. First came him, his posture tall and confident, just as she remembered. Then, another man entered the scene, someone she recognized instantly. He was a former ally, someone who had stood by her side during her early years of success. The betrayal hit like a punch to the gut, but Elena remained composed. As the two men spoke, Elena noticed the conspiratorial tone between them. She couldn't hear everything, but she caught enough: company, exposure, and downfall. They were planning something against her. There was no doubt about it. Every fiber of her being wanted to confront them right then and there, but she knew it would be reckless. She needed more information before making her move. Quietly, she snapped photos of the meeting with her phone and retreated to her car, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and adrenaline. Back home, she couldn't avoid the storm raging inside her. Why was he doing this? After years of absence, why resurface now? And why with someone she once trusted? The questions were as relentless as the emotions boiling within her. Elena was no longer the vulnerable young woman she had been, but that face, that piercing gaze, still had the power to provoke reactions she wished she could suppress. The next day, Elena gathered all the evidence and began connecting the dots. The answer became clear, though it was hard to accept. He didn't just want to destroy her. He wanted to reclaim something he believed had always belonged to him. Her life, her empire. Elena realized she was facing more than vengeance. She was up against an obsession that had never truly died. The powerful world she had built wasn't just a symbol of her success. It was the key to everything. And now he wanted to take it all back. The message came late in the afternoon, accompanied by an address. If you want answers, come alone. Elena knew it was a trap, but she couldn't ignore it. She carefully chose her outfit, simple and practical, concealing both a weapon and a small recorder. Before leaving, She double-checked the device that would summon her private security with a single press. Nothing would be left to chance. If the meeting went south, she'd ensure he wouldn't have time to escape. The abandoned warehouse, where he waited, was dark and oppressive. Elena entered slowly, her heels echoing against the concrete floor. He stood in the center, as if he owned the place. As she approached, she noticed something odd, a folder resting on the table between them. Elena, he began, his tone dripping with familiar sarcasm, finally decided to stop playing hide-and-seek? She didn't reply. Her hands were steady, but her mind raced. You wanted answers, he continued, pushing the folder toward her. So here they are. Elena hesitated before opening it, but when she saw the contents, the ground felt as though it had disappeared beneath her feet. Photos, documents, records, everything that exposed her past. Her prison time, her identity change, her history with him. Do you really think you can beat me, Elena? He said, a mocking smile tugging at his lips. Everything you've done, every step you've taken is right here. If I go down, you go with me? She closed the folder slowly, her gaze locking onto his. And you think this is going to scare me? She replied, her voice calm and measured, unsettling him. You underestimate me. She stepped closer, taking control of the space. Why don't you admit it? This isn't about revenge. You came back because you don't know how to live without control. But guess what? The game has changed and you're no longer the one calling the shots. The tension in the air was electric. He stepped forward, narrowing the distance between them. But before he could respond, Elena discreetly activated the recorder in her pocket. You've always been good with words, Elena, he said, his tone sharp, but you're still playing my game. And in the end, I always win. Everything I want, your company, your reputation, will collapse when I release this. You can choose. Walk away on your own, or fall with me. Before he could say more, Elena slammed the folder back onto the table, scattering its contents across the floor. You think you know me? That you still have power over me? You don't understand a thing. With a swift motion, she pulled out her phone, showing him the recordings and photos she'd been collecting. These are already in safe hands. If I disappear, all of it goes straight to the police. Now, you're the one who's trapped. For a moment, he was silent, his eyes calculating every word she said. Then he laughed, a low, menacing sound. You really think that's enough? You think you're walking out of here without me turning the tables? Before Elena could react, he made a subtle gesture, and two men stepped out of the shadows. They were armed, and Elena immediately realized the situation was more dangerous than she'd anticipated. But she was ready. Without hesitation, she pressed the button in her pocket, activating the security team stationed outside. The warehouse doors burst open with an ear-splitting crash, and her private security stormed in, weapons drawn. His men tried to fight back, but were quickly disarmed. He, however, wasn't done. In the chaos, he grabbed a fallen gun and pointed it directly at Elena. Enough of this, he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. You don't win. Everything you have is mine. I made you. Elena didn't flinch, her gaze steady. And now I'll end you? He hesitated, perhaps expecting her to show fear. She didn't. Before he could fire, one of her security guards shot him in the shoulder, sending the gun clattering to the ground. He cried out in pain, collapsing as he was swiftly handcuffed. Elena stood still, watching as he was dragged away by her team. The look he gave her was a mixture of hatred and disbelief. You think this is over? He shouted as they hauled him out. This will never be over. Elena didn't respond. She simply turned on her heel and walked out of the warehouse with steady, deliberate steps. Her mind was calm, every move calculated. The game was over, but she knew the consequences were far from settled. In the car, as the warehouse lights faded in the rearview mirror, Elena allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't just about what she had won, but about what she had overcome. The past hadn't destroyed her. It had made her stronger. And now, she knew with absolute certainty, No one else would ever control the board. Elena knew the weight of that folder went beyond a mere threat. It was a cruel mirror, reflecting a past she had buried, but that now demanded answers. The contents were devastating. Records of her wrongful imprisonment, her identity change, and moments that could tarnish everything she had built. For years, she had kept these truths hidden, convinced that survival depended on secrecy. But now she understood that real power lay in confronting those shadows publicly. She spent the entire night deliberating her next steps. She could destroy the documents, pretend none of it had ever happened, and maintain her pristine facade. But she knew that wouldn't solve the problem. He would use that folder to manipulate her, dismantling her empire piece by piece. If the truth must come out, it will come from me, she thought, with the resolve of someone who refused to be broken. The next morning, Elena called a press conference. The room was packed with journalists, all hungry for answers about the recent scandal surrounding her company. As she stepped onto the stage, dressed in understated attire, a heavy silence filled the air. She placed the folder on the podium and took a deep breath before speaking. Today, I have chosen to tell the truth about who I am, about what I've faced, and most importantly, about what I've chosen to do to change. Her words were clear, but each sentence hit the audience like a shockwave. Elena revealed the story of her wrongful imprisonment, detailing how she had been used as a scapegoat by a man who abandoned her when she needed him most. She spoke of her identity change, not as an act of deceit, but as a desperate attempt to rebuild her life after being discredited. I was wrong to hide this for so long, she said, her gaze steady. But I refuse to let my past be used as a weapon to destroy what I've built. Today, I stand here to own my story. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Headlines spread within seconds, carrying her revelation like wildfire. Some called her decision brave, others calculated, while critics labeled her identity change as proof of unreliability. Yet Elena remained unshaken. She knew she was exposing herself to attacks, but she also understood that transparency was the only way to neutralize his threats. The truth was no longer under her control, but it had become her most powerful weapon. Back at her office, Elena felt the immediate fallout. Contracts were suspended, investors demanded explanations, and allies distanced themselves. Yet, unexpectedly, a wave of support began to grow. People who had also suffered injustices began sending letters and messages, thanking her for her courage in exposing corruption and fighting against a system that had nearly destroyed her. For the first time, Elena felt she was building something unshakable, not just for herself, but for others as well. Amid the critical voices and sensational headlines, an unexpected message appeared on Elena's phone. It was from a woman named Sophia, an attorney who had dedicated her career to fighting wrongful convictions. Your story is powerful, the message read. If you need support, we're here. In the days that followed, more messages like this poured in from human rights organizations, activists, and individuals who saw Elena as a symbol of resilience. It was a relief to realize that despite the challenges, her decision to reveal the truth had sparked something positive. The most significant support, however, came from within her own company. During a tense meeting with her executive team, a mid-level employee unexpectedly asked to speak. I used to come to work every day afraid of making a mistake, he said, his voice nervous but resolute. But after what you did, I realized that being vulnerable isn't weakness. Thank you for showing me that. His words echoed through the room, breaking the tense atmosphere. Others began to share their own experiences, creating a moment of solidarity Elena hadn't anticipated. She realized that by exposing her truth, she had forged a deeper connection with the people around her. The praise and gratitude, often from the most unexpected places, bolstered her conviction. Elena understood that opposition would persist and that the road ahead would be long, but these gestures of support renewed her resolve. Now more than ever, she was determined to turn the impact of her story into something greater, something capable of inspiring real change. The months that followed were challenging but transformative. Elena shifted from being a respected yet untouchable businesswoman to someone deeply connected to the people she inspired. Despite financial losses and suspended contracts, she realized she had gained something far more valuable: authenticity. Her empire was no longer built on secrets or the fear of exposure. Every step forward was now grounded in the strength of someone who had faced the worst and emerged stronger. Within her company, Elena implemented sweeping changes. Inclusion programs, mentorship initiatives, and policies to protect employees from injustice were introduced, many inspired by her own experiences. "We're building a legacy that's not just about profit," she said during a meeting. "It's about how we can positively impact the world." Gradually, the narrative began to shift. Journalists who once criticized her now highlighted the social impact of her actions, and her name became synonymous with resilience and innovation. But Elena didn't stop there. She decided to establish an organization dedicated to fighting injustices in the legal system, providing support to those who, like her, had been victims of false accusations. The project, called the New Horizons Foundation, quickly gained international attention, attracting significant donations and influential partnerships. Elena took on a leadership role in the initiative, using her own story as a powerful example. "We can't change the past," she declared at the launch event, "but we can ensure it doesn't repeat itself for others." At last, Elena found peace when she looked at her reflection. She was no longer defined by what she had hidden or feared losing. Instead, she was driven by the impact she could make. In an interview, she was asked what had motivated her to reveal everything. With a calm smile, she replied, "For a long time, I thought true wealth was what we built. Today, I know true wealth is how we use what we built to change lives." Elena's journey teaches us that true strength isn't found in running from the past, but in facing it head-on with courage and determination. Her story is a powerful reminder that the greatest transformations begin when we dare to embrace who we truly are. By turning her pain into purpose and her truth into freedom, Elena discovered something far more valuable than wealth: the peace of authenticity. Now let me ask you, what's holding you back from growing? Maybe it's time to set fear aside and turn your challenges into new opportunities. Like Elena, you might find that by embracing difficulties, you're taking the first step toward a stronger, freer future. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep following narratives that transform. Share this video with someone who needs a little encouragement to overcome obstacles and find their inner strength. And before you go, check out the next video appearing on your screen now. I'm sure it will move you deeply and help you see new possibilities. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then,